This tutorial will walk you through the steps of going from Autodesk Mesh Mixer, which is a 3D sculpting program, to Slicer, which is a program that slices an object into a file that can work with the laser cutter, and then finally to Adobe Illustrator, which is where you will organize your file and then send the file directly to the laser cutter. So we'll start with Mesh Mixer, and for this tutorial I'm just going to start with a sphere, but you could start with all kinds of different objects that you can import, and Mesh Mixer also comes with a bunch of pre-made shapes. If you need a hole in something, for example, you might want to use one of these primitives. You can combine shapes as well if you overlap them. Right now I'm in the transform mode, which allows me to move the object around and also scale it in different directions. If I want to get rid of an object, I can just select it and press delete. Okay, so let's check out this edit tab. So here I can do a union that will combine these two as a mesh. There's a bunch of sort of options here. I don't know what all of those do, but we'll click accept and see how that does. Make solid, just make sure that all of these points are connected. Okay, so I'm going to start with this object and start doing some sculpting. Let me select first transform, and I'm just going to move this merged object up so it's a little bit easier to see. This Autodesk Ember down here, that's a type of printer. It just allows you to kind of see what this would look like on your on your printer. The printer that we use is the Replicator 2, so that just kind of shows what size this would be on the Replicator 2. Of course, we're not actually 3D printing these, although you could, but we will be using the laser cutter on them. Okay, so I'm going to get out of my transform, and I'm going to be working with this sculpt tool. So you have these brushes which are actually sculpting brushes, and I just encourage you to play around with these. Some are more dramatic than others. The drag tool changes your object really quickly, and just by sort of grabbing a part of it and moving it, you can make the brush bigger or smaller. But you may not want something that dramatic. So let's go back to brushes here, and I'll try something. I'll try the inflate tool. The inflate tool I can sort of use to kind of, if I move it around while I'm holding it down, keeping the strength relatively low and the size all the way up, I can sort of, if I'm right clicking to rotate around here, I can sort of start to build up the volume of the surface to change the shape of it. Now there's a cool tool here. If I wanted this thing to be symmetrical, I could click on symmetry, and then anything I apply to one side of that line will apply to the other side, so it'll keep it symmetrical, which could be useful. Now once it's already unsymmetrical, it'll apply slightly unevenly, but it'll still apply the same amount. Okay, so let's turn up the strength just to show you kind of what that does. Just grows a lot quicker. So it can get weird pretty quick. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to go back to brushes and let's try bubble smooth. That just kind of smooths out some of these parts. And then let's try flatten. Okay, so let's try flatten on this end here. So it's sort of compressing that surface. It might be easier to see on here. Let's turn off symmetry. Oh, the strength was very low there. Here we go. So it's going to be hard to see until I look from the side, but it's sort of flattened out the top of that. And the brush is sort of putting pressure on this thing. Okay. So again, just kind of play around with these things. There's all these different options. But I'm not going to get too complicated with this. I think I might just, maybe I'll try this shrink smooth here. That kind of pulls that in a little bit. And then I think I want to flatten this, or kind of, let's try the drag tool. So I'll make a dent in this one. And then I want to sort of smooth that a little bit. So let's try the shrink smooth. Okay, so I've got a kind of a hole there. All right, so that's good enough for me. I can go back in here and do some more transforming. If I want to scale this differently, I want it to be maybe a little bit larger. I can scale this up in all three directions. All right. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to click accept, and now let's export this. An OBJ is fine, or an STL is fine. I'm going to export this as hand-held sculpture, and let's have you put your name at the beginning of the the title, so it's easy to find. And we will go to the shared drive, 3D printing, and projects in progress, 3D design, and then whichever class. So that's going to export that file. Now I'm going to go to my slicer program. And if you need to find this file, it's just called Slicer if you search for that in the Cortana search bar, or go to your applications folder. So now, once that's done exporting, I can import it to Slicer. So let's click import, and oh, I don't know why this is titled something weird, but okay, so projects in progress, 3D design, and I just saved it right there. So let's open that up. Okay, so there's my object. And now I'm going to bring this, and I'm going to actually cut this into slices using this program. So this shows me the size of my object. That's actually probably a good size. You don't want it really much more than kind of 4 inches. It can be, this is 8 inches in the long direction, but the rest of the kind of volume is closer to 4 inches, so that's probably good. The manufacturing settings, I'm going to make this, I want to do a custom setting here. And I'll click Edit. Let's make a new one, and we'll call this handheld preset. And I'm going to make my material 12 inches by 12 inches, and my thickness is 0.25. So I'm cutting this out of a piece of plywood that's going to be 0.25 inches. And that all looks good. Okay, so now we have to select a construction technique, and I'm going to do stacked slices. There's a bunch of other ones you can play around with, but this is what we're going to use for this project. And you notice it's very quickly cut this thing into a bunch of slices. Now I can adjust how I want these slices to work, and there's some different reasons why I might want to do that, and I'll change that on this slice direction. So right now I think it might actually be easier to attach this thing together by rotating this and slicing from this direction. It's going to give me fewer parts that way, and I won't have kind of a weird floating part in the middle. But also it's going to be less resolution, less high resolution. I think I can get the highest resolution if I slice it actually like this. That's a lot more parts to glue together, but also those parts you can kind of see already. It looks the most like that shape that I made. So I think I'm going to go ahead with this one, even though it's a little bit more gluing. I think it's going to look better. Okay, so so this is kind of cool. I can go to my assembly steps and see how I'm going to put this thing together. And you can look at this from different angles. And it's going to number all of these. And it's basically going to create these sheets where I can print this out. Now for some reason this is not, it doesn't have the size that I wanted, which was the handheld preset. There we go. So now I've got, it's giving me 2 sheets. I want you to be able to fit these into one sheet, but this is actually we'll be able to move these around in Adobe Illustrator to make them fit into one sheet. If yours takes up more than one sheet, then you're going to have to adjust the size of it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get plans. File type is EPS, that's correct. Export to my computer, and let's go back to that same folder. Share drive, 3D printing, projects in progress, 3D design, and choose your folder. And it's going to zip this because it's 2 separate files. If yours automatically fits on one, it won't create a zip file. So I'm going to name this again David Prince Handheld Sculpture and just take off the OBJ because this is going to be a different kind of file. Click Save. Okay, so I can now import that into Adobe Illustrator. I first just have to uncompress that folder. Okay, click on these and click Extract. And now these are my 2 files. Alright, so now in Adobe Illustrator, I'm going to choose Place and go to that same folder. I can place both of these. I'm going to zoom out, Control minus, zooms out. Click once for the first one, and then again for the second one. Okay, so now I'm going to have to get all of these parts onto the same board. I'm just going to show you how to move a couple of them, and then I'm going to pause the tutorial so you don't have to watch that all of that. So what I can do is double click here to that opens this group, and then I can just drag these into the interior here, and then I'll zoom back in, Control plus zooms in, and I've got to get out of that group and back to this other group, double click on that, and I can shrink this down a little bit. Oops. Doesn't need to be that small, but these numbers just are going to kind of label the parts so that they're easy to put together. So now this is going to create a hole in this part, but that's okay to have a hollow part. Basically what I'm doing here is cutting one circle out of the interior of another circle. Okay, so I'll have to kind of select these each one individually, and actually, I'm going to go ahead and select all of these, and then I'm going to Control X to click X, and then I'm going to move back to this layer so I get them all into the same layer. Control V. Oops. Control V. I need to make sure I select this and move this out of the way so they don't get all mixed up. But now these are in this same layer, so it's going to be easier to move them around. So I'm going to put as many of these. This path, I'm not sure why it created this. Oh, that one was still on the old layer. So let's do the same thing. Control X, then we'll go to this layer, Control V, and then we can get rid of that, and actually Control X again, and Control V. Okay, so now these are all on the same layer. So I'll just have to kind of arrange all of these, and you can rotate these. It's not a problem. Just make sure that this interior number doesn't end up inside of that smaller circle. And it might be, you can go ahead and just kind of find all your largest shapes and shrink those, so you can start moving those smaller parts over. Okay, so I'm going to pause this and I'll come back when I have moved all those. Okay, so it's actually pretty tight on here, but I'm just moving my last few over. I think they're all going to fit. I had to double up on some, like here on the inside. So I just need one more spot for this guy. Let's move this one in to here. And these can actually be really close together, like nearly touching. It's not going to hurt anything if they're right up against each other. Okay, so this looks good. Now, I still have a couple of these that I left out of this group, so let me fix that. I'm going to select those ones and paste them into this group. And then there was one more here. Control X, and then okay, so now all these are in the same group. Okay, now I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and I want to separate the red and the blue layers here. They're not, well, right now they're not layers, but I want to separate them. So I'm going to go to Document, Setup, and then Edit Artboards, and then I'm going to zoom out some more, which is Control minus. I'm going to click Alt, and then just grab this whole artboard and move it actually maybe to the side, and that duplicates it. Let me zoom back in. If I press the space bar, it creates a hand tool that it can scroll from side to side. So now I have two artboards here, so I can get out of the artboards by doing by clicking this arrow tool. Okay, so now I'm going to double click to get into this group. I'm going to select one of the red letters. Then I'm going to go to Select, Same, Fill, and Stroke. So that's going to select all of the red ones here. And then I'm just going to press Delete. So that got rid of all of the red ones. And then on this one over here, this artboard, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to select the blue, double click to get in there, select, same, fill and stroke, and then delete that. So now I have one layer with my red and one artboard with my red layer, and then my, another one with the blue. Now this is we're almost ready to cut this. I'm going to select everything, and then I want to set my stroke at 0.072, and that tells it to do a vector cut in the software. It also got dimmer because it made that size line is a very thin line. And so even though I'm just going to vector cut these, but with a very low setting so that it doesn't actually cut through, it just leaves a mark, but that's going to be much faster than if I was going to try to engrave those letters. That would take you know, something like 20 minutes to engrave all of these letters, whereas if I do a vector engraving with a very low setting, it'll only take a few minutes. Okay, so this file is ready, so I'm going to click Save As. And then this time I'm going to save it. Well, I'll save it once into my projects in progress. Same name, but this time it's going to be an Adobe Illustrator file. So shared, 3D printing, projects in progress, 3D design. Just save it in here. Okay. And then I'm going to do Save As, and I'm going to save another copy into this Project Inbox folder. And then once I save it there, it will go to the Project Inbox, and then you can go over to the computer by the laser cutter, and Colleen or I will help you cut the file. Okay, the rest of this tutorial will kind of walk through the steps of assembling your parts once they're cut out.